wasn't like one thing happened or someone passed away. It was just a combination platter, work, kids getting older, me getting older. So it wasn't one thing. It's almost like you get all these bricks on your shoulders and you can handle it, but then at some point the machine just breaks down and it collapses.
Welcome back, everybody. Rich Brubaker, founder of Collective Responsibility, here today with another episode of the Mission Driven Podcast. Through this podcast, I'm trying to inspire and equip the next generation of mission-driven entrepreneurs, investors, academics. For me, this has been a 20-year journey. It's one that I love talking about, but more than anything, I love bringing together the ecosystem to share their lessons, share their insights, share their visions for where this is all headed, in hopes that it helps you get a little bit further along that path. In this episode, I'm extremely honored to be joined by Shawn Lesser, who's founder of The Real, which seeks to significantly improve the mental health of men and their families. And I wanted to bring him on because, as many of you know, I've talked about my anxiety, my burnouts, my issues, and learning how to kind of get it together, but also learning how to see the signals and to see his work, to see his new platform. Wanted to bring him on to talk not just about the work he's doing, but also about the work he's doing, because both are equally important. So with that, Shawn, thank you very much for taking the time to join us. It's really great to have you here.
Thank you, Richard. I appreciate it.
So as a starting point, it'd be great to hear, your background and the mission that you're on.
Sure. So let's do a little rewind of my background. So a background, I was born in Brooklyn, grew up in Long Island, went to Syracuse University. Then after school, my first job, I did international institutional equity sales. That's selling stocks to banks overseas in English. And then with a co-founder in 2007, we started the first impact investing investment bank called Big Path Capital. Did that for 16 years. What we do, raise money for companies, impact and sustainable companies, raise money for private equity funds. And then what I'm doing now kind of comes up out of more of the story that I went through some mental health challenges and came through the other side. And now really trying to use those things that I've learned to hopefully help other folks. I would also just add that mental health is complicated. There's a lot of different pieces. So the pieces that were super helpful for me that I think can be replicated is using the power of conversation and community to help people heal.
I guess, what catalyzed this shift? I mean, you mentioned some of your mental health issues that you went through and you're coming through the other side, but was there a moment where it hit and then there's a moment where you realized like this is now your next journey, your next part of the path and building The Real?
It was really towards the end and coming out of these treatment centers. I was in the psych ward, and then I had a friend who actually helped me through this a lot. And he was, if you think of Alcoholics Anonymous, you have a sponsor. He was like my mental health sponsor. And when I was starting to get better and I had returned to home because I was away, we were on the phone one day and we were just chatting, like two guys chatting and saying, hey, dude, this was serious. This was real, because, that's how we talk. And I was like, yeah, man, that's what we're going to call it. We're going to call it The Real. And then my buddy, Brent, was like, what is it? And I said, I have no idea, but I know there's a lot of men, women, and families suffering. And I think that we've learned some things that could help them. So that's how the name came up. And that's how the very small seedlings started to sprout.
And so then what's the core mission of The Real now? And do you have programs, events, services that you're offering through this platform, or is it just a community that you're building?
It's a little bit of everything that you're talking about. The first thing that catalyzed was really, was around having a foundation. And the foundation is based on what I was saying a little bit before, the power of conversation and community. So the foundation is based on 3 C's. It goes conversations to community to change.
How did you come to the 3 C's? Was this your own path? Was this just what you learned over the years kind of going through this, or?
This was 3 guys in a car, and we were doing a tour around the country, just telling the story. And we were kept on figuring out, like, we have to catalyze this around something. So the first C is the conversations. So I've been doing this talking tour across the country. And what happens when you tell your story about what happened to you in front of other people? It breaks down the stigma around mental health. People feel more kind of normal. I can tell you, I've had probably 500 conversations with different people, men and women, it doesn't matter, about mental health. And I tell them, what I went through, and not every single time, but a good majority of the time, the people say to me, Shawn, I never told anyone this, but, and then they tell me their story. And I could also tell you that, everyone at some point in their life has something going on with mental health, right? I was at one point, I was at 10, I was suicidal. That's a bad place to be. But everyone in their life is at a 2, a 4, a 6, or an 8. That's just being human. So when you have this conversation, then they don't feel like, hey, I'm the only one going through these difficult patches, right? And then kind of coming naturally from the conversation, and what's super helpful for me was the power of community, meaning having other people that could help me and just talk to me. And so many people showed up from so many different places. So community is super important. And we do have an app around that that's just getting up and going. And then just wrapping it all together, the last C is change. Not like major change, but almost like I think how I feel much better now. It wasn't like change everything in your life, sit on a mountain, which is fine. If you want to sit on a mountain, that's cool. But it was just kind of changing my glasses a little bit to look at things a little bit differently.
Before you entered that time where, you went through some institution, you had like the anxiety, and I even heard, like, I remember watching a podcast where you were talking about like you froze on a Zoom call one time. Like before that, like I've gone through, I haven't gone to that extreme, but I know I've gone through several burnouts where, I mean, it's awful. And I remember looking back and seeing some signals and having some things that I just kind of like, oh, it'll be fine. I'll do. Did you experience that, or was this like a sudden onslaught after 15 years of really grinding through that work and like, bam, you hit a wall? Or was there something that was going on that you were either ignoring or you weren't sure how to deal with?
It wasn't like one thing happened or someone passed away. It was just a combination platter. And it was just kind of normal pressures, work, kids getting older, me getting older. I wasn't really eating well. I wasn't really sleeping well. So it wasn't one thing. It's almost like you get all these bricks on your shoulders and you can handle it. But then at some point, the machine just breaks down and it collapses.
When you're out talking to these 500 people and you're traveling the country having these conversations, do you find you're attracting a certain group of individuals who previously may not have been comfortable talking about this?
I think it doesn't discriminate, right? I've talked to younger people, older people, men, women. It doesn't matter. But I would say men especially, here men meet shoulder to shoulder, women meet face to face. It's just kind of a different animal, and men are just going to express things differently. Both have plenty of pressures. Guys also, a lot of guys are kind of lone wolves that you just want to go out there and I'm stereotyping, but kill the bull, bring it back, and all that stuff. So there's this ingrained thing that makes it a little bit more challenging for men from that perspective.
And what about entrepreneurs? You spend a lot of time in impact. Do you get entrepreneurs coming to you as well? I mean, that's the group that I know, and that's the group that I see a lot more of that struggle with this. And I'm curious, like, are they gravitating towards this as well?
Yes.
And
Yeah, for sure. So, I am an entrepreneur myself, right? I co-founded the first impact investing investment bank and a couple other things. So I think especially for entrepreneurs, and this is one thing that happened to me, is when I got bought out of my company, and that's great, I got some money, but my old company was my whole identity. It was my whole life. It was my whole existence. And that's a double-edged sword, because if you put all those eggs in that basket, things are going to go up, things are going to go down. So if your whole life is just the company or the idea, it's going to be challenging, right? Because if your happiness is based on it's doing good or bad, of course that's going to have something to do with it. But if the whole thing is based on that, that's a difficult mindset to keep, and that's a little bit asking for trouble.
is there something unique about, say, founders 40 to 50 years old, regardless of, and male, and regardless of success? Like, do you find like this is a difficult time? Do you find that it's difficult for them to speak to each other? Because again, like, this is the group that I keep going back to.
They don't want to show any weakness or perceived weakness that I'm doing great. How are you? I'm terrific. I get it. But the funny thing is that when you are vulnerable, people come your way and they want to help you. I also, a thing that I was doing was a comparathon. And when you do that, there's always someone, doing better than you, or at least perceived in your mind doing better than you. So you're never winning that race. Sure.
When you talk about the comparathon, I was talking with someone about, if I think back to, say, like my parents' generation, they're 40, 50 years old, you'd have a lot of dudes playing like, keeping up with the Joneses. They'd buy the new this, they'd buy the new that to show that they had made it, right? But now you have, say, social media, where a LinkedIn update that I got on this stage, I exited for this amount. Like it seems like it's a little bit faster and a little bit, it may just be one moment in 5 years that was actually good and the rest of it's all awful. But because you see so much of it, you think they're all doing good and I'm not doing as well. And I'm curious, do you see that? Do you think that contributes to this a little bit and makes a comparathon a little bit more destructive than it was?
Sure, it's a human highlight film, right? It doesn't, and I've dealt with a lot of high net worths and all kinds of different folks, but when you get into their houses or you get into their cars or whatever, it doesn't matter how much money you have. Everyone goes through struggles. So one of the first talks we gave was with a group called Tiger 21. I don't know if you ever heard of Tiger 21. And we were done. The guy that helped put it together, he said, Shawn, you know what? There was a guy here. He had a $20 million exit, but he was miserable. I don't know if I equate it's nice to have money, exits, this, that, the other thing. But I don't know if I equate one to the other perfectly. It doesn't matter. Everyone's human and going through things. So that's how I look at it.
How do you approach the community aspect of the reel then? I mean, I think we naturally know that if we're able to talk to each other, that involves some trust, that involves some investment into each other, that involves some consistency. Like, how do you go about finding safe spaces for people who normally wouldn't talk about it to talk about it?
Couple of things like that. I think just having the conversation, being in that room, and then we have an app, but it's not a technology play, but it's getting up and running. And the app basically has four purposes. One, give people a safe place where they can talk about this stuff and not feel like they're judged. Two, my friend was my mental health sponsor. Be a mental health sponsor, find a mental health sponsor. Three, mental health. There's different modalities, yoga, mindfulness, meditation, all those great things that I want to learn about, but what I want to learn about that from peers versus, just salespeople. I'm a sales guy, but you want to learn from our peers. And then we do other things in person, right? So a thing that we do here in Atlanta, now we're doing it in Boston, is we do this thing called the Real Walk. So the Real Walk goes on in Atlanta. It can go on any day, but Atlanta, it's at Thursday at 7 o'clock. So what happens? Men and women get together and we walk around a park that's close to my house. Now, are we talking about mental health? Sometimes. Are we talking about nothing? Sometimes. But there's just obviously there's a lot of isolation. There's a lot of loneliness in the world. So, and also it's a great way to get exercise. That's part of it. But I think it's also kind of coming together. In the future, I think there'll be different chapters, different events. We're also in April, we're going to put on a real men's retreat. So it's only been about 15 months. So on that side, more to come. But those are some of the things that we're doing.
So what's been going on the last 15 months? Like what are the activities and what's the wider vision for this if you're to look out 3 or 5 years? Or is that too much to look at right now? Like you're just trying to enjoy this and build it and see where it goes.
So what's been going on? In the beginning, it was just talk to everyone. It was just conversation after conversation after conversation. And then going forward, I think that the Reel is also a mental health brand. So there's the foundation in place, and then there's the for-profit. I couldn't do anything for about a year because I had non-compete, but then we're putting on, for example, the first Reel Summit that's happening in New York City, October 17th and 18th, and that's the intersection of finance and mental health. And then we'll put on the Men's Summit in April, and then other things just kind of coming up. People ask me, what's the 5-year plan? I don't know, right? I think it's still early and things just are evolving. And I feel really good. So not like I don't have any investors. So I'm not tied to any VCs saying, you didn't reach this, you didn't reach that. I'm like, no, I've self-funded it to date. So I have that luxury to be like, all right, we're going to see where this thing basically goes.
But if it were to grow, let's say like you ended up with chapters all over the country, are you going to build differently this time? And are you going to build a team to support you differently? Are you going to try and manage it a little bit differently than the last group? That way, I mean,
Sure.
Not just so you can manage your own stress, but so that it can actually grow without
Sure.
it being so, about you as well.
Sure. Yeah, that's the other goal is I don't want to keep it. I want to start the fire, but I don't want to be, running around the country and the world speaking nonstop. And right now we have a great team that almost is handling kind of everything, and I'm focusing on the things that more like I like to do, right? So that's the objective is and I also think, I've always been in partnerships, and partnerships are always challenging. And this time I'm like, no, I don't need a partner. That add a lot of stress to me. And it's not like I have to have chapters all over the country and we have to do this and we have to do that. No, no, no. We will see what happens.
How do you look at the community itself? Like how important is it that you have the physical community, the physical events? Is that the priority, or is it finding products and services that can be delivered online to have the most delivery and the most application, potentially to help the most people? Like,
So for the foundation, that's about conversation. That's about community, to have more walks. You've seen people wearing the real hats. That's also just being part of the community. People all over the country, all over the world, they're wearing the hats. And what does the hat represent? Just kind of you're part of this group that's trying to, advocate for mental health, and we're stronger together, break down the stigma, be real, things like that. So that's more focused community conversation. And the other side is, since I put on so many investor events in the past, that's where the idea for the Real Summit came together, because a lot of companies, a lot of funds, a lot of investors were coming to me, and I was like, all right, this makes sense. Let's bring these two pieces together. So that side want to help to build out the mental health ecosystem. Are we going to have our own products and services? I don't know. Or we're going to help move capital that way. So let me talk a little bit about the summit. So the summit is the intersection of finance and mental health, and that basically bakes the question you had. It kind of bakes both pieces together. So I'll give you a little bit more color. So think of the event as, let's say half of it is your typical investment event: companies, funds, investors, trends, etc., family offices, foundations, etc., talking about mental health, what they're investing in, all that stuff. Then half of it, around half, is also about helping you or me as the person, where we have different workshops. How do you help yourself? How do you help your family members? How do you help your kids? How do you become a better leader? Things like that, right? And also within this event, we're also going to do, I was talking about the real walks. So the people are going to go together. It's going to be early in the morning. I don't know how many people we get, but some people are going to go for a walk. At the end of the summit, what's the objective? One, hopefully we help to build out the mental health ecosystem. What does that mean? Bring in new investors, maybe some capital moves into these different things. That's terrific. Two, you as a person, maybe you learn something that can help you. And then three, building in also that, hey, this is the first event, but we want to build in where this community is going to continue on.
if you are, you know, you're someone who's just, you're coming through your 30s, you got 40s, pressure's building up. What are some things that you can do to build resilience? And what's the role of community as part of that process?
Sure. So let's look at that from a couple of different angles. Let's first look at it of course, you should exercise, go outside, eat right, you want to meditate, things like that, get out in nature is super important. Also, we are social beings, right? So you need people to have a community. And the funny thing is, when I'm saying community, it's not like I'm not like a big talker. It's just being, when I was in a bad place, it wasn't like people were saying anything that were super helpful. I mean, they were helpful, but it was just being like, dude, let's just sit here. It doesn't matter. It's not like, or I'm gonna check on my friend. I did that this morning. Hey, how you doing? There's a lot of people I say, hey, how you doing? Right? That's all it is, to that someone that cares about them and is looking out for them, right? So that's super helpful, to have people that you can be honest with, like, dude, I'm not doing so good. And then you have a conversation with them, and then they say, oh, you know what? I'm also struggling with this. So you don't feel like, oh, I'm the only one that's going on here, because you're looking at social media and you see all the exits, right? Because it's all, smoke and mirrors there. And then the other side is, which was important for me, for someone, is to try to change your glasses a little bit, look at things a little bit differently. So let's talk about some things. One, you're lying in bed, it's late at night, right? Your head's spinning. I should have done this. I should have done that. You're ruminating on stuff. You have to understand that you are enough. You don't need to be more, right? And talking about business and, well, rumination, just to take a step back, rumination is when you're thinking about things over and over again. And I used to do that a lot in business. Why did I do this? I should have done that. Why did I? And you just, sawing sawdust, as they, And I had a therapist. She was really good. And she said to me, Shawn, her name was Jennifer. Jennifer said, do you have a time machine? And I said, no, mine broke, right? Obviously, you don't have a time machine, but sometimes in our heads, we think we have a time machine, right? So just know that that's done. And another thing, when your brain is just going nuts, right? Is your brain's trying to protect you. We have something like 3,000, 30,000, 60,000 thoughts a day, right? And these thoughts come and they go. But I used to chase them down, and that's very like rabbit holes, and that's very exhausting when you chase every thought in your mind around. So you have to understand that these thoughts are going to come and go like clouds. So there's a different things to just look at things a little bit differently, I would say.
Yeah. So are you coaching people or are you just listening to them?
I don't know if it's coaching. It's more like, dude, I know exactly how you feel, and you feel exactly like this. And I say, this is what happened to me, and this is what I did. It might work for you, or you might have something else. But it's also, I think, just the fact of having that conversation uh, is helpful. Putting your arm on someone and be like, I got you, man. I understand. I understand. And then it even, for example, the guy who helped me a lot was Brent Hurd, and he put his arm around me, and he was super helpful because he went through something similar himself. But then sometimes Brent has a struggle. Guess what happens? You give it back. Be like, dude, I got you, right? So it's not a one-way street.
So a couple more questions. Building off your experience and your knowledge, not just through the challenge that you went through, but also the work that you've done and the organization you've built. How would you help an entrepreneur look at their organization differently to help them ensure that they're able to, kind of create resilience, maintain some balance, and to really focus on their mental health? Because I feel like oftentimes we build an organization, you go really fast, you burn at both ends, but how would you, if you were to look back, do things a little bit differently so that you could maintain a little bit more balance, and actually maybe you take a little bit slower, but would you build more team members? Would you take more time out yourself? Like, how would you look at that differently, or what would you advise others to do having gone through that?
I think it starts from the top, right? It's more about that person. For example, we were talking a little bit about, changing the lens in your glasses a little bit, looking at things a little bit differently, understanding that, also just understanding of other people, and that they're going through things, and being vulnerable. If you're vulnerable with them, they're going to be vulnerable with you, and they're going to want to help you, right? So I think that comes from the top, and I think it's also having, you were talking about a little bit, like the healthy habits, for like working out and walking and things like that. That if the leader of the company is happy and healthy, and they show that, right, then that's going to trickle down to the other folks.
Let's say you're coming up on thin air, you're struggling, the panic attacks are coming in. What advice do you give to people at that point to make sure that they can back away, take a breath, cool down, and again, like, before to go from 6 to 8, like what are some things that, someone can do to back off a little bit, to take control? I mean, you're talking to founders who are like, if I take a vacation, the whole thing falls apart. How do you get them through that mental process to understand they need to step back, they need to cool off, they need to slow down?
I don't know if they have to step back and cool off. I just think they have to look at it differently. I don't know if they have to look at, this is not my whole existence is not based around the company. And then I'm putting all this added pressure on me that if this thing doesn't work out, and some things are not going to work out, that my life is basically over, right? That I'm jumping off the bridge because of this didn't work out. So I think it's more looking at it differently. Then that's going to kind of naturally, hopefully, make you a little bit more relaxed, because it's a lot of your brain racing. Your brain, it's not meant to really stop, right? You can work on it, and I feel good that sometimes I'm like, oh, I don't have to think so much. So I think it's a lot of times it's thinking less than like, I gotta figure this out. Well, this is a problem with no solution, so I'm just gonna be ruminating back and forth, and that put me in a very bad place. Just the rumination of going round and round and round in my brain. So it's kind of brain management.